What would you do if a 5-year-old girl in tattered clothes walked into a 5-star restaurant and asked for your half-eaten lobster, then disappeared into a dark alley without taking a single bite? James Whitmore was a man who had everything: wealth, power, and a name that made headlines. But on the night he celebrated his latest triumph at Chicago's most exclusive restaurant, a single question from a starving child shattered the illusion of his perfect world. That night didn't end with champagne. It ended with him running down cold, empty streets chasing a girl with haunted eyes and a plastic bag of leftovers. What he found at the end of that alley would change his life forever. A younger child unconscious on the pavement, burning with fever, 2 sisters forgotten by the world, and a silver locket that held the face of the only woman who had ever shown James real kindness, the woman who once saved him when he had nothing. Stay with us, because what happens next is not just about survival, it's about redemption, family, and the moment you realize your second chance at life might come from saving someone else's. Right now, what would you do if a little girl in a torn yellow dress walked up to your table at a luxury restaurant, not to beg, but to quietly ask for your leftovers, then disappeared into the night with them like she was saving someone else's life? James Whitmore didn't know what to make of the situation at first. It was supposed to be a night of triumph, a celebration dinner at the Sterling Oak, Chicago's most exclusive restaurant. The lights glowed golden against the marble floors, a string quartet played softly in the corner, and every plate looked like it had been handcrafted by gods. James sat alone at a private table, his tailored charcoal gray suit pressed to perfection, his silk tie knotted neatly under his sharp jawline. He had just doubled his company's market cap. A genius move in the stock market had made headlines, and tonight was about basking in the glow of power, success, and prestige. But then he saw her. At first, he caught only a flicker of movement from the corner of his eye, something that didn't belong in this world of polished crystal and gold-rimmed plates. He turned and locked eyes with a child, a girl no older than 5, standing just outside the restaurant's window. Her face was pale, too still. She wore a faded yellow dress that looked like it had once been cheerful, now worn thin by the cold. Her sandals were mismatched. Her eyes, however, were the loudest part of her, dark, wide, and hollow with hunger that went far beyond food. And then she stepped inside. The maitre d' moved toward her immediately, but before he could intercept, she walked straight toward James's table, ignoring the glances of disgust, the stares, the shocked gasps. She stopped at the edge of the table, looked at the half-eaten lobster on his plate, and said barely above a whisper, "Sir, can I have your leftovers?" James blinked. The air shifted. A hum settled in his ears. Everything slowed down. The instinct to wave her off was strong. This wasn't his world anymore. This was someone else's story, not his. He was no longer the boy who once begged for food behind grocery stores. He was James Whitmore now. Tech titan, billionaire, untouchable. But something about her voice pierced through the decades he had built between who he used to be and who he had become. He said nothing. He simply pushed the plate toward her. To his surprise, the little girl didn't eat. She didn't touch a single piece of the lobster or the vegetables. Instead, with delicate care, she reached into her tiny coat pocket, pulled out a crumpled plastic bag, and slid the food inside. "Thank you," she whispered. And then she ran. She ran through the restaurant, past the stunned diners, past the stunned staff, and disappeared out the heavy glass door into the city night. James sat frozen. He should have felt good about himself, generous, humane, but he didn't. Instead, he felt something cold coil around his chest. Why hadn't she eaten? Why was she in such a hurry? And God, why was she alone? Without thinking, James stood up, dropped a few large bills onto the table, and followed her out into the night. The Chicago air was sharp and stung his lungs. His shiny leather shoes tapped too loudly on the cracked pavement as he scanned the street. And then he saw her again. She darted between traffic lights, disappeared behind a brick building, and slipped into a shadowy alley. James hesitated for just a second before following. The alley was narrow-lined with trash bins and the faint smell of mildew. The kind of place no child should ever be alone. The flickering light overhead barely reached the end of the lane. But there she was, kneeling beside something. No someone. A second child, smaller, still. James's breath caught. The girl was lying on the cold pavement, motionless. Her lips were cracked, her skin paper white, her forehead shining with fever. And the girl from the restaurant, Lily, was whispering, tears in her voice as she opened the bag of food. "Sophie, wake up. I brought lobster. Remember, like Grandma used to tell us about? You'll love it." James felt his knees buckle as he dropped beside them. He didn't ask questions. He didn't need the full story. He saw it in Lily's trembling hands and Sophie's shallow breaths. This wasn't hunger. This was desperation. This was survival. He fumbled for his phone, called 911. His voice shook as he gave their location, as he begged them to come quickly. But even as the operator assured him help was on the way, James couldn't stop staring at the scene in front of him, at Lily's small fingers brushing her sister's feverish forehead, at the way she clutched a tiny silver locket in one hand, like it was all she had left in the world. And for a split second, he thought he recognized the face in the tiny photo within the locket. No, it couldn't be. Not her. James stared harder. His mind reeled. The woman in the picture, it was Margaret Whitmore, the woman who had saved him when he was a scared, starving boy on the streets. The woman who had taken him in, told him he was worth saving, and fed him his first real meal in years. The woman he had promised he'd never forget, and these were her granddaughters. His throat tightened. The ambulance sirens howled in the distance, but James didn't move, because something far bigger than coincidence had just collided with him. He had been found, and he hadn't even known he was lost. We're so sorry to interrupt the story here, but we hope you're feeling the weight of what just happened. Before we continue with what James does next, and do you think James followed the girl out of guilt or something deeper? If you were in his place, would you have done the same? Where in the world are you watching from today? Let us know in the comments, and if this story moved you, please give it a like and send some love our way. James Whitmore had lived through market crashes, public scandals, and hostile takeovers, but nothing had ever hit him like the sight of that alley. He knelt beside the girls as the sirens grew louder, echoing off the narrow brick walls. But Sophie wasn't responding. Her skin was burning hot to the touch, her breathing shallow. Lily had gone silent now, staring at James with a look no child should know, worn out heavy like she'd carried the weight of the world for too long. James took off his tailored coat and wrapped it around Sophie's fragile frame. The silk lining meant nothing now. "Stay with me," he muttered, not even sure which of the two girls he was saying it to. Lily didn't cry. She didn't beg. She simply kept whispering to her sister, "You have to wake up. Please, not like Grandma." Those words pierced him. He couldn't stop looking at the locket in her hand. It swung gently as she rocked back and forth, her thumb pressing into the tiny silver frame like it held some kind of magic. When James dared to glance again at the photo inside, there was no more doubt. Margaret Whitmore, the only person who had ever shown him mercy when he was just a scared little boy stealing from trash cans. She'd called him by his name before anyone else did. She believed he could be someone when no one else bothered to see him. And now her grandchildren were here starving, sick, forgotten, in the same city where he had built an empire. James swallowed hard, fury rising in his chest, not at the girls but at himself, for forgetting, for walking past every cry for help with noise-canceling headphones and a stock ticker in his face, for thinking he had repaid his debt to Margaret with success. He hadn't, not even close. The ambulance finally arrived and paramedics flooded the alley. Lily didn't move from Sophie's side, not until James lifted her gently and said, "I'm not leaving either of you." At the hospital, St. Vincent's Medical Center, James sat outside the ER for hours. His phone buzzed with missed calls, urgent emails, board members confused by his silence. But he ignored them all. He was back in a world where none of that mattered. Later that evening, a nurse led him to a pediatric room where Lily sat beside Sophie's bed, holding her tiny hand. Sophie had been stabilized, but she was still weak, her body worn from malnutrition and fever. James stood in the doorway, hesitant. "You came," Lily said, softly, not looking up. "I promised I would." Lily turned. People promise a lot of things. He walked in, knelt beside her. "I broke my promise to your grandmother. I'm not going to break it again." She studied him for a long moment. Then slowly she held out the locket. "She said you'd be someone important one day. Someone who wouldn't forget." James's heart cracked wide open. "She saved me, Lily. I owe her everything. She told us stories about you, Lily said. Said you had fire in your eyes, but you didn't know what to do with it yet. James gave a short laugh through the tightness in his throat. That sounds like her. Silence stretched between them. Sophie stirred slightly in the bed. Lily leaned forward quickly, brushing her sister's damp hair aside. She needs medicine. A home. Not just this room. You're both coming with me, James said. From now on, you're not doing this alone. Lily hesitated. We had a dad. Once. But he left. He was sick. Not like Sophie. Sick in his head. James paused. Do you know where he is now? She nodded slowly. Last I saw him, he was passed out behind the shelter downtown. Said he'd come back. Never did. James felt the storm brewing in his chest again. But this time, it wasn't helplessness. It was purpose. He would find this man. Not to punish, but to understand. And if there was still a sliver of humanity in him, he would drag it out into the light for these girls' sake. You're not going back to that alley, James said firmly. You hear me? I don't care what it takes. I'm going to make this right. Lily didn't answer, but she leaned slightly toward him. Not trust, not yet, but maybe the beginning of hope. We're truly sorry to pause the story here, but we promise what comes next will shake everything you think you know about James and the girls. In your opinion, do you think James is doing this out of guilt, or is this his true self finally breaking through? If you were Lily, would you trust someone like James after everything? Let us know where in the world you're watching from, and if this story moved you, please like the video and tap that heart to help us reach more people who need this reminder of humanity. James Whitmore never imagined that the greatest turning point of his life would come not in a boardroom or a headline, but in a hospital room lit by soft lamplight and the steady beeping of a heart monitor. It had been 2 weeks since that night in the alley. 2 weeks since he stepped away from his empire and into a world he had spent years trying to forget, a world where hungry children waited in silence, where promises were broken, and where a woman named Margaret Whitmore once held his hand and reminded him that kindness could change everything. Sophie was recovering slowly. She could now sit up in bed, her color returning day by day. The doctors at St. Vincent's had called it a miracle that she'd survived such advanced malnutrition. But James knew better. It wasn't a miracle. It was Lily. Lily, who had shielded her sister from the cold, who had begged for food with quiet dignity, who had held on to that little silver locket like it was all she had left of a world that once cared. Lily had stayed strong through it all, but now in the stillness of the hospital corridor, James finally saw her cry. He didn't interrupt. He simply sat beside her on the bench outside Sophie's room, his hands folded, waiting. When she wiped her face and looked up at him, her voice was small. She almost didn't make it. James nodded. But she did. Because of you. She had no one else, Lily whispered. I didn't either. You do now, he said quietly. And I mean that. For the first time, she believed him. James had begun making arrangements. He'd hired a legal team to begin guardianship proceedings. He brought in a trauma counselor, a pediatrician, a nutritionist. But more than anything, he brought presence. He was there every morning, every night, reading to Sophie, listening to Lily, filling the cold silence with warmth neither of them had known in years. But just as things began to feel stable, James received a phone call that shifted the ground beneath him. Mark Anderson, Lily and Sophie's father, had been found. He was alive. He had overdosed 2 months ago and had been taken to a city-run rehab clinic under a fake name. The staff, now aware of the girl's situation, said he had made progress. And now, he wanted to see his daughters. James's first instinct was rage. The idea that this man who had disappeared when they needed him most would now want to return after everything. But then he looked at Lily. She didn't ask for details. She didn't even flinch. She simply said, "Do you think he's still sick?" "I don't know," James admitted. "But he says he's trying." She was quiet for a long time. Then she nodded. "I want to see him. Not because I need him, but because Sophie does." The meeting was arranged for the following afternoon. At the rehab center, the air was heavy. James sat beside the girls in the visitors' lounge, his hand resting protectively on Sophie's shoulder. Lily sat stiffly, her fingers wrapped around the strap of her bag. Then the door opened. Mark Anderson stepped in, thinner, paler, but more lucid than James expected. His eyes found his daughters instantly, and they welled with tears. I know I don't deserve to be here, he said hoarsely, but I'm here, and I'm trying. I swear to you, I'm trying. Sophie blinked, unsure. Then slowly she slid off the chair and walked toward him. When she reached him, she touched his hand, like testing whether he was real. Lily stayed seated. Mark turned to her. I'm sorry. I should have come back. I was supposed to protect you, and I left you to protect her alone. Lily's lips trembled. You promised us 100 times you'd change. I broke every promise he said. But if you let me, I'll start with just one. I won't run again. She didn't run to him, but she nodded. That was enough for now. Weeks passed. James didn't rush anything. He worked closely with the clinic, the courts, and the girls. Lily and Sophie stayed with him in his estate outside Chicago, where laughter began to echo in hallways that had long been silent. Sophie painted on the windows with washable markers. Lily helped the cook in the kitchen, even though she said she preferred burnt toast over fancy food. And one afternoon, as the three of them sat in the living room, watching cartoons, Lily turned to James. You know, Grandma always said family isn't just blood. It's the people who show up and never leave. James smiled. She was right. I'm glad you came back. He swallowed hard, blinking against the sting in his eyes. I'm glad you found me. That night, James placed the locket in a small glass frame and set it on the mantel. Next to it, a new photo, Lily, Sophie, and himself, arms linked in front of the fireplace. He had built tech empires. He had amassed fortunes. But in the quiet moments, in the shared stories and soft laughter of two girls who had been forgotten by the world, James found something more powerful than success. He found home. We hate to stop the story here, especially now that it's come full circle. But we'd love to know what you think. Do you believe everyone deserves a second chance? Even after abandonment, if you were Lily, would you let your father back into your life? Or would that door stay closed? What did you think of this story? If it touched your heart, comment number 3 below. If it felt just okay, leave a number 2. And if you think it could have been better, drop a number 1. We want to hear it all. Tell us where you're watching from. And don't forget to tap that heart and share this video with someone who believes in redemption and the power of found family.